Good morning. It is about 11:50 in the morning on Wednesday, and I guess this is our last introductory video. This video is for Module 8, Culture, and the ELL classroom. The learning outcomes for Module 8 include being able to identify cultural issues in today's classrooms, being able to deal with cultural conflict, and to be able to prepare and deliver an effective lesson plan for a reading or an ELL classroom. The readings for Module 8 are pretty straightforward. There is one article for everyone titled Culture in Language Learning and Teaching, and then graduates have an extra one. There's some video to watch, and then there is some additional resources that you might find interesting. I did include an extra article as an optional article, or one that you might want to read later, called Code Meshing. I've mentioned this to a couple of you in your comments, grading comments. It is excellent, and it talks about writing instruction in a multicultural classroom. It comes from the Reading Teacher Journal, and I highly recommend it. It's excellent. A few reminders about some long-term assignments that are due on Sunday. First of all, the portfolio assignment. Please, when you are submitting that, make sure that your reflection paper is clearly labeled or titled. And then also your lit review is due. And please make sure that the articles you've read are cited in a reference list using APA citation. Your initial pre-knowledge quiz will be retaken, and you can kind of see how your learning has expanded from this class. And again, these are all due Sunday by the end of the day. Module 8 assignments. The discussion is pretty straightforward. You are picking from 4 options. And if you could have that posted by Saturday so peers can respond by Sunday. Then you have the self-evaluation quiz, and please don't forget the journal entry. And if you could kind of think about the class in general and give me some feedback on things that you thought that worked, things that didn't, I would really appreciate it. The Module 8 assignment for everybody is to make a bibliography of culturally diverse books for the classroom. It does not need to be an annotated bibliography. It is simply just a list of 15 fiction and 5 nonfiction books in APA format. So what I wanted to do for the last part of this introductory video is to give you some ideas, some recommendations of some of the best culturally diverse books I've found. But I really felt like before I can do that, I need to define culture and how we should be defining culture in the 21st century. So if we go to the Cambridge Dictionary, they define culture as the way of life of a particular group of people, especially as shown in their ordinary behavior and habits, their attitudes towards each other, and their moral and religious beliefs. I want to broaden that definition beyond what some might think of as traditional groups, such as Hispanic culture, African American culture, the Asian culture, but to broaden that to include other groups of people such as the LGBTQ culture, the incarcerated culture, families that have loved ones that are incarcerated, unique groups such as those highly intelligent students that we have in our classroom that need specific accommodations and modifications to meet their needs, but also students with handicaps or students with sensory impairments. These groups of people with similar characteristics are also included in our definition of what a culture is. They are particular groups. They do have ordinary behaviors and habits, attitudes towards each other, and then also have specific moral or religious beliefs. So when I'm presenting my list of books, I wanted to establish that that broad definition is being applied. So, what we want to do with our libraries, why we want to include these culturally diverse books, is it provides a window or maybe even a door into new experiences, new groups of people, new lifestyles, new ways of thinking that students might not normally be exposed to. And so I am presenting to you Deborah Johnson's top 10 plus culturally diverse books. And these are listed in no particular order. So, my first book, my number 10 book, would be Brown Girl Dreaming. This is written by Jacqueline Woodson, and this is a chapter book. As you can see, has won several awards. That is a personal narrative about her experience between two very different cultures in the 60s and the 70s, South Carolina and New York City. And so it's comparing these two cultures in her life as she was growing up. It is an excellent book. My next book is titled The Bicycle Man, and this takes place during World War II on the Pacific side of the war. And it is a story about a Japanese school who is having a field day, and two American soldiers asked to join them. And these two soldiers look very different from what these kids are used to. One soldier's African American, and one has very bright red orange hair. And it's just a great story about how two completely different cultures come together and enjoy a day of outside play. My next book, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. Everyone should read this book. If you haven't, you need to go out and get it, and it should be a summer read. It is a great story about comparing two completely different cultures during the Civil Rights Movement, one being in Michigan and one being in Birmingham, Alabama. Just a wonderful book of how an African American family experiences two completely different cultures or settings. It's a great book. Esperanza Rising is a story of, and this is a chapter book as well. A lot of these are chapter books. Is a story about a little girl who was growing up in Mexico in a very affluent setting, but then her world completely changes, and her family is forced to move to California. This is during the Depression, and when her family has to move, she becomes very poor and has a completely different lifestyle. And it's this story is about her journey in understanding her new culture and her new setting and her new lifestyle and how she comes to grips with that. Terrible Things by Eve Bunting is an allegory that is used to explain the Holocaust to younger kids. It is just a really wonderful way to explain what went on during World War II and the Nazi Holocaust. And I have used this book with eighth graders, seventh graders, all the way down to third graders. And it is very applicable to a culturally diverse classroom library, mainly because, well, a couple things. It compares religious backgrounds, but also different cultures. So it's a great book that would represent different cultures within your library. My next recommendation is a companion novel set, Bud Not Buddy and the Mighty Miss Malone. Bud Not Buddy is representative of kids who are homeless, families who are homeless and living in the street. Bud is actually an orphan and is searching for a family. And then Mighty Miss Malone is representative of families who maybe lose a loved one, parents who leave, and her quest in finding her parent that left, and then dealing with the realization of the changes that have taken place within her family. Both these take place during the, I think maybe like the 30s and 40s. I'm not sure on that though. Martin's Big Words is absolutely hands down one of the best Martin Luther King tribute books ever written. It would be considered nonfiction, but it definitely has a nice narrative flair to it. I highly recommend it if you have never read it. Heather Has Two Mommies is a great book to represent the LGBTQ population, and also the fact that families can look differently. And this is a nice book. This is just a nice narrative about what families, alternate families, may look like. I Am Malala, the chapter book, and then a picture book are two books that represent the Pakistani culture, but also what it's like to be a woman in that culture, and also how to stand up for what you believe in and what you think is right and what is not right. And so these are two great books to have in your classroom for students to get a better idea of what it's like within those cultures. And then Drawn Together is another wonderful book. This culture would be the differences between the elderly and the young, and that is definitely two different groups of people that we see today. This book is about how a grandfather and a grandson really have a hard time finding things in common, but through art, they are able to make a connection and really build a relationship and a bond between one another. Some additional titles that I love. American Born Chinese is a graphic novel. You either love this book or you hate it. I enjoyed it. I really didn't like it until the end, when it brought all the stories that go on that are written within this book together. But it's definitely a good read and a great one to have in your classroom. The Name Jar is another book about how some kids don't like their name because it's different from the dominant culture in the classroom or within where they live, and then how those kids can come to appreciate and value their roots and their culture. The Birch Bark House is a book about Western expansion and how smallpox was brought to the Native American population within the different states where the explorers landed or arrived, and it's a great book to understand what it was like during those times. Hidden Figures should be in every math class. Out of My Mind is a great book about understanding what it's like to be handicapped and to push back on generalizations we make about students or kids or people in general with handicaps. And last but not least is Knock Knock, which is a great book about understanding what it's like for families who have loved ones that are incarcerated. So that is my top 10 list of culturally diverse books. Feel free to use some of those in your bibliography. And if I didn't include any books that you absolutely love that would fit into our broad definition of culturally diverse books, please email them or put them in your discussion response. And I guess this brings us to the end. I would like to say thank you very much for all your hard work, for your patience, for your constant communication with me. I really appreciate that. It has been a pleasure working with every single one of you. And just because the class is over doesn't mean we can't continue to share ideas and to give one another resources for the classroom. So please keep the lines of communication open. And as always, email me if you have any questions or concerns about Module 8.